Hello, BookTube and AuthorTube. I'm back again. This time I'm going to be answering some of the newbie tag questions from AuthorTube. Without further ado, let's begin. The first question is, how did you find out about AuthorTube? Found out about AuthorTube through BookTube. I think it's pretty common to see people doing both. And maybe back around, even though I've been kind of following BookTube for a few years now, sometime back around NaNoWriMo this year, I think is the first time I stumbled across AuthorTube. That's how I got here. What genres do I write in is the second question. I've written in a number of genres. I do kind of have a mainstay that I go through, but it's been kind of a long story. So like a lot of people, when I started off writing, I started off with a serious story that I wanted to tell. I think I've talked about this briefly, or maybe not so briefly, in another video. But initially the impetus to write came from a 10th grade AP English assignment I had, where we had to write the first chapter of a historical fiction novel. Wrote that about some brothers who were fighting each other, and I'd set up the story for it in the Chinese Revolution. And then, enjoyed that, but set it aside for not quite 10 years, but actually, I guess a little bit more than 10 years. Had set it aside, but that story always stuck to me. And then the teacher had said, if you ever write a book, you've got the first chapter done. And for whatever reason, that story had really stuck with me through that time. In the intervening 10 years, I spent most of that time working with a focus on North Korea. I had learned Korean and had lived over on the Korean Peninsula for about 5.5 of those years. Had done a lot of research toward, in regards to North Korea, particularly in regards to their military. And also as just part of my individual studies, had looked a lot at accounts from defectors who had come out of North Korea, political prisoners. And so when I sat down to write the story again, I decided to set it during the Korean War. Because once again, you had brothers from the North and South, family members that were fighting one another. And so with that, I had heard about NaNoWriMo, I think maybe a week before it began. This was back in 2004. Said, hey, what better way to go about it? And so I had already done, as part of my work, a lot of the background for it. And so sat down and started writing. And the first night at midnight, I started writing. I probably wrote 5,000 or 6,000 words in the first few hours. At the time I was working a night shift. I was out of the military, but working a night shift at my job, so it wasn't hard to stay up and write. And then I wrote myself into a corner. And so I closed the document and I didn't look back. The next year I came back again, knew what NaNoWriMo was expecting it, so I started researching a little bit earlier. That might be the only story, or the story where I had the biggest plot. We'll get to whether I'm a plotter or pantser further down in the questions, I guess. But I decided to change the story up a little bit and make it modern day. I was no longer writing an assignment for an English class. And the story of a lot of defectors, particularly people that had been prisoners in the political prison camps, had really affected me. And most of the defector stories at the time that had come out, it was about their journey out of the country, their decision to leave, and a lot of them had faced time in political prison camps. So that was the motivation. And at the time, not too many of those stories had come out. There were, probably a number of books written, but not nearly as many as have come out in intervening years. And I wanted to tell kind of the life story of somebody. So I started writing that. So it was a deadly serious book. It was framed in her execution inside the prison camp. And, even though it started out as her youth, it traced the history of North Korea from the mid-70s up through roughly probably 1998 time frame. Up through the death of Kim Il-sung and then the famine, and when the economic downturn really happened. And so, very, very serious book, very important story. Interestingly enough, so I came to that one in NaNoWriMo, wrote through it in about 9 days. Wrote I think it was 79,000 words. Um, I still love that story, but when it came back to writing the next year, um, my mind had to go some very, very dark places to write that. To get into the character's mindset, to be able to describe what happens at those camps. It's one thing to read about it. It's another thing to I don't know. When I write, it takes me to a different level of interaction with what's happening, and I really try to place myself deep within the character's point of view. And so with that, it just took me to some really dark places. Fortunately, it was only over a few days. But I decided I wanted to write something a little bit more lighthearted. So I turned to writing comedy, dark comedy. There's probably always a bit of darkness or black humor to the stuff that I write. And that would be the genre I find myself fitting in most. The stuff I initially wrote was probably pretty filthy too. There was a lot of sex humor and just bizarre stuff that was involved in it. Then around oh gosh, let's see, I think it was 2011 I became a Christian, and so I had to really sit and kind of revamp what it is I'm writing. Do I want to put this stuff out? Do I want to associate my name with that stuff? And it was interesting because I had taken a story, I had polished it, and had started submitting to agents when that came about. So it was a real interesting decision, and that put me in a couple of years where I started searching different things. I think, how do you write a dark comedy that is essentially clean? And certainly when you look at Christian fiction, that there's not a whole wide spectrum of stuff out there. You've got prairie romances and apocalyptic thrillers, and neither one of those really suit what the style I tend to write. So like I said, I played around for a few years. One year I wrote a story for my daughter. It was an adventure, middle grade adventure. At the time she was in fourth grade. And that was a blast because she was able to read it as I went, and she would hound me, where's the next chapter? So that was a lot of fun. It was a story I really enjoyed. And then finally I started finding my voice again, and it still is, still does come with a dark sense of humor. Still some black comedy, but like I said, I found the way to get there. My writing's a little bit more absurd than it had been before. Maybe a little bit looser tether to reality, I guess. But that's where I've been writing. And so I said if there's a genre I fit in, even though I would say my writing style balances somewhere between the literary and commercial, because I usually have some light experimental stuff going on. I would say that it fits in that literary camp a little bit still, and some themes and stuff that I work up through my writing. But I would say it fits in that weird literary category, which is a hard thing to find agents for. When you look at comp titles, there are certainly a lot of novels that you can point to, but a lot of the people who have written those novels are very well established and not people you're supposed to compare yourself with, and probably not people I would compare myself with. But that's where I found myself, and so enjoyed that. So I guess that's my my genre is weird literary, though I've done a couple other things. And one point along the way, I wound up writing a screenplay that was optioned by a foreign market, which was also fun. Let's see, what is my preferred writing tense, point of view, and category of the story? Category, most of what I've written has been adult. I did write that middle grade for my daughter. I'd done a YA retelling of Romeo and Juliet one year. I didn't complete the novel. I was really enjoying that. Might go back to it at some point. But most of what I write is adult. As far as my preferred point of view, it really depends on the story. I think most of the time I probably default to a third person. I like to be close to It'll be a deep third, pretty close most of the time. There are times I've been more distant if the story requires it. I've written in first person. Um, Most of the time, I think, has been past. I've never written a novel in present tense. Um, that just strikes me as a little bit off. So third person past is probably with a close third is probably most commonly what I write. Uh, but like I said, first person, it just depends on the story. Um, and there have been times I've written stories with mixtures where, there's one first person voice and some third person voices that POVs that come up through the book. So, like I said, it just depends. The story's really got to take me to where it's at. Number 4, am I a plotter, a pantser, or a plantser? Actually, back on topic 3 with the story taking where it's at, it's a funny thing. A book I wrote, I started it, I think, 2 nanos ago, maybe 3 nanos ago, I don't remember. Finished it last summer. It's a longer book. Wound up being just under 190,000 words. And I was aiming for that. I wanted to try my hand at maximalism. Might not be long enough for maximalism, but it was. I've got sprawling storylines and stuff. But with that one, I had written one of the characters in first person, and then decided that didn't work. Let me tell you, going back and trying to change all that is not an easy task. I'm still finding places where I've got some I's and my's in there that don't belong, as I'm working on going through and editing and polishing that up. Anyway, digression aside, am I a plotter, a pantser, or a plantser? And I assume a plantser is something in between. I would say I definitely lie on the pantser or plantser area. When I come to a new story, I typically, I think, start with the concept. And very quickly from there, we'll try to figure out who the characters are. And then with that, as I start a story, I don't always know where the end is, but I know the character's main goal, what they're trying to get out of the story, and what is likely standing in their way. So the basics for a plot outline, and I may know a few of the, particularly the major waypoints, your major act points that'll happen along the way. A lot of times I'll leave, unless I'm writing something like the North Korean story where it was framed in her execution. There I obviously knew what the ending would be. But I usually try to leave the ending open to see where the story takes me, where the characters take me, but have a general idea of where I'm going. And I'll talk more about that later on also, just because I think there are some really interesting things you can do and apply to your writing that can really help. Particularly if you do stuff like NaNoWriMo, where you've got these writing sprints. Am I self-published, published, or yet to be published? I am yet to be published. I think I'd always started out wanting to be traditionally published. To go that route, there was something about, and it's not even a money thing, although the industry is certainly changing in that regard, at least in some genres. I'm not certain with what I'm writing, but like I said, I started out wanting that traditional publishing, and I wanted the verification of the system of the gatekeepers and the the bigwigs and whatnot, that hey, you can actually do this and you can do it well. So I was looking for that kind of validation. Over time, I care less and less about that validation. So I've thought about, and I have a lot of friends who have done independent publishing, either through small press or through through self-publishing. It's something I consider more and more. Not so much because of the hurdles to get into a traditional publishing deal. I don't mind putting the time out. I write the stories mostly for myself. Yes, I love it when people read them and enjoy them, but really I enjoy writing the stories. So though I have a lot in my proverbial trunk, I've enjoyed every story I've worked on, and I don't view it a wasted effort. But at the same time, I want control over my work when it goes out. A lot of the outrage mobs and stuff that have started up when, you know, people are offended. I don't want to risk making it through all the hurdles to get close to publishing, to have, you know, a publisher or an agent get cold feet on a project. The stuff I write, well, I don't intentionally try to offend people, at least in a mean way. But there's stuff that's offensive. I'm writing comedy. And I grew up in, you know, the 80s and 90s. You know, I grew up with a very kind of dark sense of humor. And, you know, where the inappropriate was fun to laugh at. And I realized times have somewhat changed, although the reactions I get to my stories from people, you know, they're still laughing. They just feel that they shouldn't be laughing. You know, one of my stories, I strap a paraplegic to a goat. It was necessary. His wheelchair had been destroyed, and there had been a nuclear weapon dropped, and they were in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and there was no other way to get the guy around. But people felt bad for laughing at it, but they laughed at it, and it worked for the story. What publishing company, literary agent, and or printing company are you represented by or use? Doesn't apply. If you're not yet published, what is your dream publishing house or literary agent? I'm not certain I have a dream house or literary agent other than the ones, obviously reputable ones who would represent me. One thing I've found out over time is that you know, you can't tell who connects with your work until you get it in front of them. There are people that, you know, when you read their descriptions, even read what they represent, you think it'll be a great fit and it isn't. There are people that you think that that it might not be a great fit and it is. And then there's always the offensive side of stuff where somebody might not want to put something out because of the market. So as long as it's a reputable literary agent, you know, I don't want to go somewhere where somebody doesn't have any connections and I can make more selling it on my own. Like I said, the profit isn't the end goal, but at the same time, putting something out to such a small publisher that you know, that it wouldn't be worth the effort where you're selling 10 copies, that's not really what I want to do either. So we'll see what happens with it. Number 7, what AuthorTube related videos can we expect to find on your channel? It's a good question. I think I picked up a lot of tips and tricks on how to write, particularly, like I said, with fast-paced stuff. One of the things I did a couple of years ago, I think 2.5 years back, participated in the 3-day novel challenge. More of a novella. Most of the stuff that's submitted on, you know, on the long end. I think there are some people that get longer, but usually like 35,000 words, I think, is their key range, and there are some people that submit even less than 20,000. But I wound up placing 3rd place with one of those. It was another book where I went in with a concept and characters and not a whole lot else, but was able to put together a storyline over this 72-hour period. It was very valuable. So how do you approach your writing? And I think there are a lot of things you could do. The whole time I've been participating in NaNoWriMo, well, since the 2nd year, I've been in ML in my area, so I've been able to help people that have struggles with that. So I think I could provide some feedback and tips and tricks on that end. You know, it's always fun to share what I'm working on. I don't know how much of that I'll do online, but we'll see how it goes. Also, some of the other stuff that's involved when it comes to editing, when it comes to beta reading, you know, those sort of things. When did I start writing? I think I answered this above, but in brief, really started writing in earnest in 2004, or at least writing novels. I think prior to that I had done some just minor short story challenges. They weren't anything official, just on message boards and stuff I participated in. And those were fun, and I really enjoyed it, and that probably was a spark to my trying the National Novel Writing Month. But yeah, it was really in 2005, after writing that first one, that I really got bitten by the bug and kept with it. What was the first story I ever wrote? I wasn't somebody as a child who wrote a lot. I do remember having a picture, and I believe there was a story that went with it when I was really young, preschool area, I think, where it was about a giant going to the bathroom, urinating, and I remember my mom asking some interesting questions about that one. But yeah, there was a story with it. It was probably only a couple sentences long. But that's what I can think of. Other than that, I don't remember the topics of most of the short stories I did, but I already told you about the novels, or at least the first couple. What authors have inspired my writing the most? I think initially Kurt Vonnegut did a lot, just because when I really came to reading, and if you want to hear about that, you can take a look at my BookTube Newbie Tag. I found Vonnegut very enjoyed him and was very influential. Not saying that his style is exactly, or my style is exactly like his, but there were just the approaches to writing, the joy you could have in writing, the learning the rules and how to break them was something important that came from there. Poloniak was another person that I read early on that once again went through most of his stuff. Now, I don't enjoy horror, so there are a couple of the books that he's written that I haven't read. I've read some of those too, but very early on started going through most of his library. Those have been big. Like I explained on my BookTube channel, because I had gone into the military and not to college right away when I came out, my AP classes had passed me out of the English, and I had foolishly believed the lie that an English degree isn't going to get you anywhere, and so I didn't take any further English or literature classes, which I really regret. But because of that, a lot of the authors I read are authors that I've come about on my own later on, and sometimes just a lot of it was going through to the bookstore and looking at the shelves and discovering things. And at the time, I would pass by longer books and such. So I missed Thomas Pynchon until a few years ago, and when I read it, I was kind of amazed because it's like, okay, while I don't, our styles are very different. But at the same time, there's a similarity. I get into the bizarre, kind of funny, dark humor, a lot of pastiche in some of my stuff. So it was just interesting to stumble upon that and go, oh, there are people that write like me. Kind of. Like I said, I don't want to compare my prose with his because, he's a master in the field. So don't read into that. It's not a statement of arrogance. Let's see. Next, question 11. Do you schedule your writing sessions or simply get to writing whenever you can find the time? It depends. I'm somebody that I like deadlines. That's why NaNoWriMo really worked well for me. Obviously, that has its limits, just working 1 month a year. I also do the camps, and I write at other times too. With critique groups and stuff, can help give a deadline to going through and editing and polishing and such. I don't have a schedule. I'm not somebody, a lot of people say if you want to write and write well, you have to write every day. No matter how hard I try, I can't do that. It doesn't work for me. I write best when I write in large bursts. I like writing, I don't know if my hands can hold up to it anymore, but I like writing when I do 15,000 word days and just knock out big parts of the story. Because you really get a chance to get into the character's head and to see things through. And the method I use really helps just keep the story arc in perspective, even if you're not aware of the story arc while pantsing. It keeps the progression of the story going. And so with that, it's hard to sit and schedule, I don't know, a 15,000 word day might take 8-10 hours or something of writing time with, obviously with some breaks in there. But it's hard to sit and actually schedule that time, especially with a wife and a daughter who's getting ready to go off to college. So those big months like NaNoWriMo are times when I can get away with that somewhat. So I do that. Other than that, I do have a recently started meeting again with a group weekly to write, which is nice because it makes me focus, keep a focus on my writing so I don't drift too long without getting into it. But like I said, I can't sit and write every day. I need time to recharge, to think about my stories. And when I'm in the middle of writing something, my head is always going through it and going over stuff, and I'm practicing dialogue in my head. And I've heard of writers who do write every day, that make a career of writing, that they'll often go sit in front of a blank wall for 4 hours a day or something. I'm probably doing the same, but also while carrying out my day job and such. Even if I made it big, I'm not certain I would quit a day job. It's nice being around people, and I get inspiration for stories from that. Do I type on a computer, typewriter, write everything out by hand, or use a blend of those? And where do I write in general? It's all on a computer. I no longer have a typewriter, and that was really before my time, and I think the effort with it, it would be an interesting exercise. I think overall the effort would be too much, especially when it comes back to editing and other things. I remember growing up and doing school assignments on typewriters, and those were typewriters with autocorrect. So that would, like I said, it would be an interesting exercise, and it might help with some things. Maybe if I was doing a short story or working on some poetry or something, I might try with a typewriter. I've done some poetry by hand. Even then, most of the time on the computer. It just is a really convenient tool that works for me. Where do I write in general? It really depends where I am. So, like I said, my daughter's a senior in high school. Some of her activities take place about an hour away from where we live and late at night. So I don't like her driving that long late at night, especially after a full day of school. So I'll take her up and go sit in a coffee shop for 3 hours, and that's a great time to write. I write at home, usually sitting down on a comfortable chair, whether it be a couch or something, and the laptop in the lap. Sitting at a desk and writing I've done it in the past, but that tends to be a little bit more difficult for me to focus. Let's see, the last question. What are you most looking forward to now that you're a part of AuthorTube? Looking forward to conversations with people. I always enjoy getting a chance to talk to writers, to interact with writers, and I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to participate. Like I said, I did screenwriting, where it started with a class through a local college. Had a really good screenwriting professor there, and that led to an opportunity to sit and work through a program for a foreign market. And so we sat with a writer's table and got a chance to sit and bat around ideas. Had a chance to go to Writer's Retreat Workshop a couple times, and had a chance to interact with people. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed interacting with people, getting advice from people, giving advice to people, exchanging stories, talking about tips and tricks, talking about what's going on in our writing worlds. It's just a fun thing to do. So I'm looking forward to that interaction in a little bit different market. I don't know when it comes to AuthorTube, how many people are authors looking at each other talking about stuff versus how many people are readers seeking these things out. And I think most of my interactions in author environments have all been, even though, obviously authors need to read, people who write books and who write stories bring a different perspective to reading than those who just read. And so if there are people who are readers that are following along, and since I'm also going to be filming videos for BookTube, it's likely I'll stumble across some people like that. And so to hear their perspectives on things, maybe these will be the videos that they watch 15 seconds of and turn off, or the ones that they skip. Of course, that could be all the videos, I guess. But, and I'm looking forward to see what comes of this. I don't know. I've been somebody, unfortunately, that I just lurk on BookTube up to this point. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the interaction with people, and I'm really looking forward to that. So with that, I think I'll leave off there. If you have any questions or comments on this, go ahead and feel free to leave a comment below. Please like the video if you liked it. If you didn't, you can dislike it if you want. I prefer you didn't, but you got to do what you got to do. Subscribe if you'd like to hear a notice every time I post a video. Go ahead and click that bell. Otherwise, we'll catch you later. Thanks, YouTube. Bye.